I'm sure if you're a collector, you probably won't be able to relate to this, because if you collect video games, you're probably collecting for a wide spectrum of consoles. Personally, I have things going back as far as the Mega Drive up until the latest and greatest PS5 and Switch games. But back when I was a kid through the late 80s and the 90s, we had a ridiculous amount of consoles to choose from in a short space of time. I started off on the Mega Drive. We had a 1 and then that got nicked, so we got the 2, and then my brother took it with him when he left, and then my dad bought me the ultimate Mega Drive. I think, what is it called, like the Multi-Mega? This thing is really expensive these days and I wish I still had it. I've got no idea what happened to it. But then I bounced around from Super Nintendo, PS1, N64, and then eventually landed on the PS2. The PS2 came in and around the same time as the internet came around. And the reason that is significant is because that's when we first started getting our major influx, if you will, of information regarding consoles and games. See, up until that point, you'd have to rely on television shows like Games Master, which was outdated by the time it was aired. And of course magazines, which again still exist today, but they are a little bit outdated. As soon as they're printed, something else gets released and that's not in the magazine, that's been pushed out to consumers, and you're reading it and you could be reading outdated information. So when it comes to what consoles were coming out, what games were coming out, we were a little bit in the dark most of the time. Plus, I was a little bit too young to really care or know what was going on anyway. But when the internet came out, the PS2 era came, and I went into secondary school, no one ever really spoke about going back to PS1 and things like that. Everyone had PlayStation 2s, we were all talking about the games we were playing, and that was that. And then when the Xbox 360 came out, I was obviously a little bit older. I was 18, I think, in 2005 when that came out. The graphics from the PS2 to the Xbox 360, mind-blowing. Don't get me wrong, the graphics jump from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One is still impressive, especially when you play a game like Rise Son of Rome and then you go back and play whatever was the latest release on the 360 at the time. You can tell that the jump is crazy, but the gap between that PS2 and that 360, that blew my mind. My point is, not that there was a stigma necessarily, but it was always ingrained in my mind to never go back. And of course this may not be relatable for some of you because you may have kept your games from when you were a kid and now and again you'll go back and play them, or maybe you've been a collector for decades and you can't really remember. But for me, when the latest console came out, that was it. I'd never look back. I would never go back and play another game. The only time I'd ever make an exception, really, and the only thing I can think of off the top of my head, was Fight Night Champion on the Xbox 360. When the Xbox One came out, that was the only game I ever went back to play, and the reason for that was because there wasn't a boxing game on the Xbox One. I've spoken about it before, and I think now is the time to buy PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 because I can only really see it going up. It can't drop anymore. People are still buying these things. They're now starting to collect them, myself included. So, where is it going to go? Of course it's going to go up. The more the demand, the less the game on the shelf, and then people are going to have to up their prices because there aren't that many of them left. And yeah, okay, going out and buying 12 copies of FIFA 13 is probably not a good idea, but I can imagine that most games on the 360 and the PS3 will rise in price over time. The PlayStation 4 is very similar to that. However, the prices are starting off on a much higher rate. But I can definitely see them going up and up over time, especially now that Sony has ditched the PlayStation 4. They've stopped making the consoles. Whatever is out there, and that's the end of it. I'm pretty sure that they've said that they're going to do the same thing with video games as well. There won't be side-by-side new releases with PS5 and PS4. There may be for the odd thing, but I think that they're going to knock that on the head because the PS5 is now finally readily available, and they can make enough of them to meet demand, or at least for the most part anyway. Let me know in the comments when, if ever, it changed for you. See, for me personally, it wasn't through the pandemic that I had this nostalgia trip. It was a lot later. It was well after it had finished and people were getting back to their normal lives. And then for some reason, it just clicked in my brain that I wanted to quit doing FIFA on YouTube because it was killing me mentally, to be fair. And then I started thinking, wow, I have been blind for the last 8 years. Now I'm going to be playing some video games, and I'm going back and playing through all the old stuff, and it's made me want to go back even further to where I am with my Mega Drive collection. But you will almost certainly have a different tale to tell. Have you only recently got into collecting? Why? Let me know in the comments. Maybe you've been collecting for years, but you only really collect the newer stuff. You don't look back. Is there a reason why you don't go back and collect older games? I've seen in the comment section, actually, 1 or 2 people say that the nostalgia feeling for video games is amazing, but never act on it. Don't go and actually play a game that you hold in high regard. So for example, in my Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway video, which 3 people watched on I'm Grateful to You 3 people, one of the comments was, nostalgia is amazing, but just don't go back and play these games because you'll realise how bad they actually are. And it's always nicer to have the memory of how good the game was as opposed to going back and experiencing it these days, because the latest games, and not necessarily even the latest games, but games that have been released in the last few years, are so much better, and they've improved so much, and the graphics are so much better, the storytelling and the acting is so much better than a game that was released 15 years ago. And whereas I do agree, I do still go back, and I do have nostalgia glasses on when I play older games, but I'm glad I do, because if I looked at them for what they actually are, and I forget my entire experience with that game, yes, I would call the majority of them quite bad. But with nostalgia glasses on, I can still appreciate what it was when it originally came out, and I can still enjoy it today. The whole point of this video was, well, nothing, to be fair. I just fancy talking about why it took me so long to get back into video game collecting and playing. And of course, I'd like to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments as well. The next video is going to be a series video, so look forward to that. We may or may not be picking up a console, stacks of games, and it may have cost me nothing. If you want to check out a series video, you can click here. And until the next time, goodbye.